Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you once again to the New England Antique Racers Hall of Fame induction, the 5th annual. My name is Kim Hart, and listening to Al talk about, some people want to kind of get off to the Super Bowl, but I do hope that you stick around and really savor this time. We have some very special moments that we'll see today, and I know that everybody really enjoys getting to see each other again. And as a matter of fact, when I look around this room, I am very much reminded of a family reunion. In that family, there are first, second, and third generations of people who have one common bond, and that bond would be racing. I see the first generation made up of people who pioneered, the people who really had it rough as they thrilled the fans with their talent, their ingenuity, and mostly their guts. I see the second generation, the people who learned from those who were there before them, and who were inspired to carry that knowledge forward and take the levels of accomplishment yet even higher. And then there's the next generation. And believe me, we still have a lot to learn. And thankfully, through the New England Antique Racers organization, we are given just that opportunity. As we honor our pioneers, we get to look back, appreciate what they had, what they did with what they had, learn from it, and be inspired by it. As anyone knows, it takes a lot of hard work and enthusiasm to run an organization like this, but that's not all. It takes financial support. For the last 5 years, NEAR's largest corporate support has come from New England Racing Fuel. Partners Mike Joy and John Holland donate to the NEAR Treasury from proceeds raised selling modified tour t-shirts. So before we move on to the induction portion of today's event, we have a special presentation to be made to the New England Antique Racers organization. To tell us more about their program and make yet another donation, I would now like to ask you to welcome Chief Operating Officer of New England Racing Fuel, Mr. John Holland.
Thank you. New England Racing Fuel, being a vendor in this sport, you're always trying to look ahead, and the future is everything. We signed another racetrack this year. John, do we have more gallons than last month? But we also try to look towards our past, and that's what we're here to do. About 5 years ago, we came up with this modified tour t-shirt program, and a way to compensate the cars that are involved in the t-shirt, we would have to write checks to them for about, $70, which really didn't make up to much money for those guys. So Mike thought of the idea. He said, let's take that money, you guys, and put it towards our past. So this is this year's t-shirt that we have available. It's the winners that used the Sunoco product from last year on the modified tour. And then the front side, we love America with this American theme this year. We love America and we love modified. So that's the t-shirt. I'd like to have Al Feeney come up and I could present him the check for this year, a 4-figure check to use towards the NEAR Hall of Fame. Thank you, John. You can have the shirt, Al. For $10.
Okay. Thank you, John. On behalf of all the membership of the New England Antique Racers, we certainly commend you and the New England Racing Fuel for all you've done for us. Be very frank, that Mobile Museum that sits out front would not have been started had it not been for your 3 previous generous donations. That was the impetus for us to get started, and we've moved forward. Hopefully we've used your money wisely, and we thank you for it. And your commitment has been very inspirational and provided a lot of motivation for us, because every time we went to do something, I said, this money was donated. We have to use it correctly, and we have to make them proud. So thank you very much.
I love people who give back to the community, in this case being the racing community, and these are really cool t-shirts. I saw the ones that people were wearing last year, and a lot of people were wearing them. Now earlier I talked about the value of knowledge and the importance of passing that knowledge on. Today television has become a tremendous resource in that endeavor, but it couldn't be done right without the communicators. These are the people who provide that valuable link between the drivers, the teams, and the people in the stands or now in the TV audience, the fans. With Fox being new to the game last year, they had a true challenge set before them, but a challenge they met because they brought in the right people. Some of those key people are part of our racing family. Someone else could have presented information with presence and accuracy, but to be the best, you have to have a true interest. When you're interested, you care to ask the questions, you care to understand the answers, and present that information in a way that brings everyone in to feel like they can be a part of it. If I could, I would like to take a quick moment to congratulate both Mike Joy and Dick Bergeron on a job well done this year. Of course, I don't want to forget Ken Squire at the beginning of the season. They all made us very, very proud. You know, if people from outside the sport had been called upon, the racing community, they would have seen right through them. But when we looked at the team, led by Mike Joy, what we saw was knowledge, understanding, compassion, and a whole lot of heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I now introduce to you one of the great people who represent our racing family, today's Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Mike Joy.
Thank you, Kim. Sure what these are for. Maybe later in the program. Well, enough about today's racing. You're all a part of it. You see it on TV, and these are the same faces that I see at the racetracks around New England. So let's not dwell on that. Let's do what we're here to do and take you back and celebrate the careers of some really great racers, those who are here and some who have left us. But I'd like to start by asking, and I'll call you up by year, of induction, the members of the Hall of Fame who are with us today, to please stand and for some well-deserved rounds of applause. The class of '98, Ollie Silva, Gene Bergen, Bill Welch, Ernie Gahan, Harvey Tattersall Jr., Ron Bouchard, Richie Evans, Bill Slater, Pete Hamilton, Ed Flemke, Renee Charland, and Bugsy Stevens. Would the members of the class of '98 please stand? The class of '99, Red Foot, Hop Harrington, Eddie West, Fred DeCero, Bill Greco, Leo Cleary, Anthony Venditti, Marvin Richin. Would you please stand? You know, it was Marvin's idea to take the antique out of the Hall of Fame, and Marvin, you see we've done that. It's now the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame, as it well should be. The class of 2000, Dave Humphrey, Giacomo Giacomo, Buddy Krebs, Charlie Elliott, Fats Caruso, Homer Drew, Ralph Moody, Ron Narducci, Don LaJoy, and George Summers. The class of 2000. And the class of 2001, Don Rounds, Hully Bunn, Ralph Cusack, Don McTavish, Chick Stockwell, Art Russo, Jack Arute, Bobby Santos, Fred Rosner, and Denny Zimmerman. Would you please stand? And again, thanks to all of you for continuing to be involved with this endeavor. At a West Coast event earlier this year, I saw comedian Dick Smothers, whose comments were repeated in Auto Week, and he says, you know, I'd love to buy back some of my old race cars, but because I drove them, now I can't afford them. Which is kind of what has happened, I'm sure, to some people in this room. The memories, though, remain. We'll move right to our inductees of the class of 2002 as soon as Father Stevens has finished working the house and taking collections. He's collecting for the Renee Charland Racing program. The great thing about this dinner is you get to see people, and maybe I only get to see Bugsy once or twice a year, so it's kind of great to be here. The other great thing is only have to see Renee once a year, and that's at this dinner, too. Lou Boyd he has in common with one of our inductees today an alias. He raced as Finch Fenton as well as under his own name on both dirt and asphalt. He's written also, I think Dick Bergman got him into a secondary career of writing for racing publications, and he's co-authored a really great biography about Kenny Shoemaker titled The Shoe. And he will be our first presenter. He's been with us, I think, every year on the program since we started this Hall of Fame. So would you please welcome Lou Boyd.
Now I got thinking over there, if this was a Sunday afternoon in Kansas and a whole group of people got together and they suddenly got talking about car racing, they'd probably think about, the Charlotte area, Indianapolis perhaps, Southern California, as the great breeding grounds for racers. Well, what do they know? Think about it. Here we are for New England Lap 5, and thanks to the incredible efforts of Al Feeney, Dan Party, Pete Zanardi, R.A. Sylvia, and everybody, we've got just another stellar field of inductees. Mine is Bill Wimble, the legendary 50s and 60s era Charger, who, like Bugsy, Ernie Gahan, Reaney, Richie Evans, Pete Hamilton, all became NASCAR national champions. And you know, when all of us strokers today think back on what that means, it gets even more amazing. It is said that in a 2-year period, Reaney ran 400 shows from Louisiana to Maine, towing old roads with an old pickup truck. How did those guys do it? It's quite possible that Bill Wimble, our bespectacled former dairy farmer from upstate New York, has some clues, and these might be some of them. First of all, raw talent in spades. Doug Wolfgang once told Dick Berggren and me that anybody who's going to be any good goes out of a ballpark early on in his career with the foot still deep in the injector, upside down. Wimble did that. They say he was out of his socks wild. The first time that he ventured down from Lisbon, New York, those 200 miles of bad road down to Fonda, he encountered the grand old man, Steve Danish. Danish, frankly, was thunderously unimpressed with this young Wimble's style, and with his finger firmly affixed on Wimble's nose, he said, "You just drove a whole race spun out." Over the seasons, the very few seasons following, that wildness would immediately rinse away, but the talent and the speed did not. In fact, Wimble began to develop a cognitive, though still gutsy, approach to racing. We will all remember him touring around Stafford's Clay in the lead in that perfect power slide with his pony wheel placed 6 inches away from the infield. It was absolutely smooth as silk. But the issue is, how did he get out front? In Bill's words, "I had to run on the edge." You know, there's all this talk about how you can't win a race in the first lap. "Bull," he said, "I can't tell you how many races I won on the first lap. I just had to get out of the pack quicker than anybody else. The competition was that brutal." Well, maybe it was brutal, but it sure didn't keep Wimble from winning hundreds of races. It's clear also that Wimble was willing to commit all the energy and personal sacrifice necessary to be a winner. It meant talking people into rides, it meant learning the system, and it meant for years sleeping in a bed, often almost twice a week, while gallivanting around to distant fairgrounds here and there. And he did go to distant fairgrounds, from the little bull rings up around Montreal to the freshly laid banks of Daytona International. You just wonder how it was possible. There weren't any Winston Cup or Outlaw haulers back then, replete with hot tubs, VCRs, and dancing girls. No, Wimble's answer was much more simple. What he got was a new Ford Coupe road car every year, always red and white, red and black, and one of them had a 312 in it with dual quads, and the 312 was built by Holman and Moody. The car was so fast that Wimble actually out-timed the Ford factory team on those timed races on the sands on the Daytona Beach. And if the truth be known, I don't suspect it was only in Florida that the car went that fast. The enterprising Wimble actually arranged for an immune stretch on the New York highway, the New York Thruway. Essentially, at the height of his fame, he could travel at any speed he wanted on that critical highway bandwidth that had Monroe County out to the west and Stafford to the east. In the mid-'60s, though, through with chasing points and national championships, Wimble began several seasons of running just the high-paying events with Dave McCready's team. They were awesome, almost melodic in their efficiency, precision, and businesslike approach. They won everywhere. The music would stop, however, on Saturday night, August 24th, 1968, in a grinding crash at Lebanon Valley. Serious head injuries would end his career right on the spot. Also stopped right on the spot was his watch from the violence of the accident. And that watch now sits in the Dirt Museum, forever pointed to 9:50 p.m. and 32 seconds. Wimble's energy and sense of system, however, remained very much intact, and our soft-spoken former hayseed farmer has become quite the businessman extraordinaire. First, building trucking businesses, selling them, then entering factoring, and now dabbling in internet startups with his thoroughly lovely wife, Nancy, from their home office near Tampa. Though New Yorkers, Bill and Nancy are with us today, because like New Yorker Richie Evans, Bill was a multiple New England track champion. He won the modified point chase at Stafford in '64 and '65, scooping an impressive 19 features along the way. He also ran Norwood, the Park, Fairhaven, Thompson, Oxford, and State Line. On a very personal note, over the last couple of years, for various reasons, I've gotten to know Bill Wimble really well. And let me tell you this, nothing that guy could win would surprise me. Here is one exceedingly competent and nice human being. And so, it becomes my privilege and our profound honor to present for induction to the Near Hall of Fame in perpetuity, the legendary Bill Wimble.
Hi, folks. Lou, thank you very, very much for that impressive talk about my career. I'm overwhelmed by it. Don't know what to say. I did ask Lou before, we're sitting at the same table, and I did ask Lou if he was nervous, and he said, not exactly. Well, I've got the exactly. Al Feeney, in his meticulous preparation for this event, sent me a video of the 2000 induction, which I watched with a good deal of attention. And one thing impressed me. That was that some real tough New England Yankees got up there and got emotional. I want to tell you that I'm the worst of the worst. So if I stop any time here, it's because I can't go on, and I'll just get back to you when I can. It's the way I am. Emotion overwhelms me at times, and I never know when it's going to happen. When it does, I'm done until I can, until I can gather myself up. And I cry at everything. I cry at, in sad movies, and I cry when they play the national anthem. I cry when I see excellence, and it could be a great tennis match, it could be a great move on the racetrack, it could be excellence in journalism. There are people in journalism here today, Dr. Dick Bergen as an example, who can make me cry anytime. I've had to put up with this guy. Thank you very much, Rini. You'd think I could have been rid of him, wouldn't you? Somehow. but excellence in journalism is something that I enjoy. Dr. Dick Berggren can make me cry anytime with some of the articles he writes. Dave Argabright, it's a given. He writes, every article he writes, I cry. And Ken Squire, the great Ken Squire, he can make me do it with words. We go back a while, he and I, maybe 45 years or something like that. He corrected me once on this, said I was a little short. Anyway, it's been a great career, and I have had a heck of a good time. I love these events. I am so happy to be here. I mean it. I'm sincere. I love to be here. I love these events. I love to get the chance to talk to people that I raced with and people that I knew. Don't see them much anymore. You know, I'm awful lucky in a way. I've been inducted to, this is my 8th Hall of Fame. And I can tell you, I can promise you that this one means as much to me, every bit as much as the first one did or the middle one did. You name it, they mean a lot. It means, you know, it's 33 years since I sat down in a race car. And to be remembered after 33 years is a pretty moving thing to me. And probably more special is the fact that I did not spend a whole lot of my career in New England. So I'm not sure that I belong in this Hall of Fame, but I am sure glad to be here. I appreciate it ever so much. What I did do over my career was to race with an awful lot of wonderful drivers from New England. And not so much in New England, but other places. And most of them are today deservedly in your Hall of Fame. I'm sure glad that I had the opportunity to do that. Most of my racing in New England, although Lou mentioned many places, most of my racing was done at Stafford Speedway. And when it was dirt. And I loved that racetrack. It could have been built just for me. It was perfect. You know, I've got a couple of little notes here that are supposed to make my mind work. Look down and see those notes and make my mind work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I love Stafford, and to tell you the truth, I never met a racetrack that I didn't like. I liked all racetracks, but probably liked dirt better than anything else. I was never so happy as when I was in a great big broad slide, hanging it out. I was living. That's what I love to do. I have a curse that I wish I didn't have, but I guess everybody has one that's in the business of one kind or another. And my curse is that I know I won a lot of races. The statistics say that, but I don't remember many of them. Unfortunately, I'd like to remember all those victories, but I don't. But the one thing that I do remember is every race that I should have won and didn't. To this day, 40 years later, I relive those doggone things. I'll wake up at night and I say, I should have done so-and-so. And I just agonize over it. That's the curse I have. Luckily, I do remember a few wins, and I'm only going to tell you about one of them. It was at Stafford Springs, and it was the first time that I ever saw Stafford Speedway. In 1960, I was the NASCAR National Sportsman Champion, and I said, I've done that, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I've done that often enough. However, in 61, I had an absolutely marvelous year, better than the 60 year. And with a month to go, I had a mathematical chance of catching the leader. So I decided to give it my best shot. One of those weekends at the end of the season, during that last month, my race car had a different driver in it at Langhorne, Pennsylvania, because my owner loved Langhorne and I couldn't go there. It was not NASCAR and I could not go there without losing my points. So, luckily, a gentleman in Rochester, or near Rochester, New York, named Pete Hollebrand, who was pretty famous as an owner in the years of Cookie, Gerald Cook, gave me a weekend with his car. We went to Flemington on Saturday night and I wrecked it, of course. And we bent the front axle up so that we had a lot of camber in the front wheel, and we had no place to straighten it. So we lined it up and we fixed the tow and we went to Stafford Springs the next afternoon. My introduction to Stafford. Obviously, I started in the rear. The camber didn't hurt anything, and at that time George Janowski was the hot shoe. And I started behind George, but not much because of his feature win record. He was near the tail. And I don't think George saw me pass him. I passed him early, and I was gone. And George was so sure that he won the race that he showed up to pick up the checkered flag just as I was taking it away. That's one I remember. And George Janowski is a friend of mine, and I think he is one of the sweetest guys that I have truly ever met. Heck of a race driver. I was lucky that day. In 1964 and 65, I did make it part of my itinerary to be there every Friday night. And I was lucky enough to win the track championship in those 2 years. But I experienced something there that I never experienced before in my life. I got booed. No place else had I ever been booed, no matter how much I won. And there was just one difference: no fan contact. If you all remember, the pits were on the opposite side of the racetrack from the grandstand. And I arrived late, just in time for fast warm-ups. I used to leave my farm at noon, come out of the hayfield, take a bath, drive 330 miles to Stafford. Half of that was 2-lane road. I'd get there just in time for fast warm-ups, and when the feature was over, I drove it straight onto the trailer, and I was gone. So I never saw a fan. I got booed plenty. And that should be a lesson to all of us, I guess. Pay attention to the fans. They're what makes it for us. That's why we're there. I learned the lesson. I always spent a lot of time with the fans everywhere else, but Stafford happened to be a special situation for me, and there just wasn't time to do it. But I'm sorry, in a way, that I didn't do it anyway. So I learned a lesson, and I hope maybe somebody else around here today will learn that same lesson. Pay attention to the fans. They deserve it. I guess enough stories. It's time for a couple thank yous, and let me get sat down. I'm a relationship person, and I love, as I mentioned before, I love these things because the relationships have a chance to renew themselves. Some of my relationships go back a long ways, and over here at the table sitting there that I'm also seated at, Dick and Dorothy Waterman. A lot of you will remember Dick Waterman, who ran the Utica Rome Speedway for 15 years. Nancy and I have been friends of theirs for a long, long, long time, going probably somewhere between 35 and 40 years. Dick, I suspect lots of you drivers here today had things to do with Dick back in those days. And sitting next to Dick, a fellow by the name of Bob Noble. He and I go back 40-some years. And he's a retired, successful oil man who was retired to his native Vermont, built himself a nice home out there in the woods, and we keep in touch. And he brought with him his boyhood friend, Bucky Isham, who's a retired school principal from Vermont. Sitting over there is John Tellini, who waved flags over many, many, many of you older drivers in here, Utica, Rome, Albany, Saratoga. And I want to thank you, my friends, for being here for me. And this is a tough one. Oh, there's my Nancy over there, too. Yeah, see, it's coming. I'm going to have trouble here. I'm going to have a little trouble here, but Nancy and I have had a wonderful life. I call her Nancy with a smiling face, the girl of my dreams. Damn it. I knew I was going to have this problem, but anyway. She has given me 35 wonderful years of marriage, and I thank you, babe. Wish my crew could be here, to thank them. I talked to Freddie D. Carr, who was instrumental in my career in all of the wins, or not all of them, but most of them. Freddie couldn't make it. We chatted for half an hour the other night. Dougie Rundle, who I'd like to have here too, couldn't make it. But their hearts are here, and they told me so. And I want to thank them for it. Without Freddie and Dougie, I wouldn't be as good as Lou says I am. I just wouldn't. And lastly, I sure want to thank Near, Al Feeney, and his crew, his complete crew, who put this type of thing together. You know what a job this is? Believe me, this is the biggest job in the world. To make something like this come together and have it all nice and easy is wonderful. Thank you guys, and I want to thank everybody that had anything to do with getting me into this Hall of Fame. I love it. Thank you.
Our next presenter got hooked on auto racing at the young age of 11, a trip to Seacock Speedway. He's written columns for papers and magazines on auto racing, edited a book, raced sports cars and drag raced, and then became a race official, first with NASCAR and shortly thereafter with USAC. As an attorney, he's been involved in landmark cases involving auto racing. He's been an executive official and the race steward for 2 Indianapolis 500s. And May 2001 marked his 41st year as an official at the Indy 500. Would you welcome John Noddy?
Thank you, Mike, for that introduction. Al Feeney, members of NEAR, thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this great event. I want to congratulate those members of the year 2002 class of inductees, and you really don't know what an honor this is for me today. It's impossible to read any story about auto racing or the history of auto racing without coming across, whether it's in Clymer or Scalzo or Dick Wallen, any of the authors, or Speed Age magazine, for those of you who remember that, without coming across the name of Johnny Thompson, who was treated very reverently in those articles. I've tried to separate Johnny's career into 3 main phases. And some of these names are going to be perhaps a bit non-New England to you, but bear with them. Golden Boy. He picked that name up during the period of 1936 and 1952. That's when he was winning midget championships in New England. Mad Dog. Mad Dog is a name that you would never want to associate with Johnny Thompson. You never thought of him being a Mad Dog. And I'll explain why he did get that name. And finally, the Flying Scot, which was the moniker that was handed to him during the period 1952 to 1955 to 1960. How many of us can say that when we were 14 years old, somebody came along and built a racetrack right across the street from our house? I wish I could say that. I can't. But Johnny Thompson could. Because in 1936, a track was built across the street from his house. And he watched that being built, and he watched it and watched it, and he figured out a way to get in there. And when that track opened the first day, he had it handled. He snuck in like a good race fan. I've done it. I had my own instant pass kit at Lonsdale Sports Arena. We've all gone through some of that. So Johnny watched what he saw that first day in amazement, and he was the last to leave. The midgets were absolutely fantastic. The following year, at age 15, he built his first race car. It looked a little like a swayback horse. He had this huge radiator up front, he had the high tail, and things came down in the middle a little bit. But it looked great. The radiator was a little too large for the car. He started driving the following year at age 16 and raced with Bay State for 3 years until World War II broke out. At that time, he went off into the U.S. Army Air Force and served as a crew chief on a B-25 bomber in the Mediterranean theater. He earned 5 battle stars and also the Distinguished Air Force Medal for bravery. Following World War II, he, like many others, came back to where they had left for the service. And Johnny picked right up with racing. He won his first feature that year in 1947. In 1948, he was a UCOA New England champion, and he followed that up in 1949 with a repeat. That's when he picked up the name Golden Boy. There was a book written about the UCOA, United Car Owners Association members. And I remember the author, Margaret, I think was her first name, and she nicknamed him, and that's a name that I have heard at Lonsdale and Seekonk and other places attributed to Johnny. The next period is 1953 to 1954. At this time, Johnny moved up into sprint cars, first with the Caruso Offie, then with the very powerful Sam Trailer Offie in Pennsylvania. And Sam Trailer, who was a gargantuan-sized man, who was very, very pleasant. His size just gave a wrong impression. Sam Trailer gave him the nickname Mad Dog, because here you have this New Englander coming down into Pennsylvania, into the home territory of Tommy Hinnershitz. Now, Tommy at that time had been the Eastern Sprint Car champion for 4 consecutive years. And here comes this young New Englander who beat him and won that championship. He won that championship in 1954. What a record. 8 wins, 5 second place. He continued to run sprinters on and off, and it was during the same period in 1953 that Johnny ran in his first Indianapolis 500. That was a hot year. Very, very hot. Very humid, very hot. And the reason why I went to Indianapolis that year, I was still in high school, was because of Johnny Thompson. We were so proud to have a New Englander in the 500-mile Indianapolis race that we all followed it. I was able to follow it a lot closer than some. I was able to get there. And I'll never forget the thrill of seeing Johnny Thompson race in his first Indianapolis 500. His car suffered a broken oil tank, which put him out of the race, but then he jumped into Spider Webb's car and drove another 45 laps in relief. Because of the heat, there were 2 and 3 relief drivers per car. It just was a tough, tough day. The third phase of his life, 1955 to 1960, he qualified for 8 consecutive Indianapolis 500s. His top finishes were a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th. The high point was in 1959, when he took a newly designed race car, painted pink. They never had a pink race car in Indianapolis up until this. He took this pink race car and went out and set a new track record and sat on the pole. He finished 3rd that race, only because he had to make one extra pit stop because of a problem with his tires. He dropped down to 3rd. At that time, the name the Flying Scot was applied to Johnny, and it took hold. He had been married. He and Evelyn Peterson were married in 1951, and they lived in, apparently first in the Lowell area, then they moved to Springfield, Mass. And in 1956, Johnny and Evie and their 2 sons, Dale and Dana, left Springfield for Boyertown, Pennsylvania. A typical race for Johnny Thompson, the 1957 Langhorne 100. You had 2 laps to qualify. On the 2nd lap, he spun, did a 360, kept going, and that lap was the 4th fastest of the day. His first lap was the 1st fastest of the day. So he did start from the pole. He jumped into the lead at the start of the race. He started lapping cars in 3 laps. By lap 41, he had lapped the entire field. On lap 59, he had a tire go down. It was a rapid deflation. Today, that's what it's called, because no one wants to hear that a particular brand tire suffered a blowout. So you have these rapid tire deflations all of a sudden. So Johnny came around to the pits, pulled into the pits, hit the brakes, spun because of the bad tire. They got him turned around, changed the tire, got him off, and in 6 laps, he had retaken the lead. He went on to win that race in 59 minutes and 53.74 seconds. I only mention that because of all the years of racing, that was the very first dirt track 100-mile race ever run in less than an hour. And he did it with a pit stop. The rest of them did not. One consistency that ran through Johnny's entire career was his phenomenal ability to race anything with wheels. His groove was the high one. He liked to plant that right rear on a cushion or up next to the rail. And that's where you'd see Johnny Thompson running, up high, whether it was Lonsdale Sports Arena or Langhorne. Many drivers feared Langhorne. We've heard references to Langhorne earlier today. And particularly the area called, and you don't have to listen to this, you can close your ears, Puke Hollow. I mean, it's not the thing that you want to say after you just got through eating. But they feared Langhorne. Johnny did not fear Langhorne. Johnny feared no track. But Johnny did fear one thing, and that was snakes. One evening, he and his wife, Evie, were coming home to their house in Boyertown. They pulled into the driveway, and there ahead of them was a snake in the middle of the driveway. Evie is the one that had to get out of the car to shoo the snake away so John could get out of the car. Here's the man who conquered Langhorne and other venues and had a little problem with snakes. Being shy was a trademark of his. He let his driving do the talking. But he was fiercely proud of one thing, and that is his Scottish heritage. A loving husband and the father of four fine sons. David and Darrell had been born since the move to Boyertown. And when they moved to Boyertown, their first 2 sons, Dale and Dana, went with them. So 2 were born in Massachusetts, 2 were born in Pennsylvania. 4 sons, all whose first names begin with D.A. At that time, Johnny was running the D.A. lubricant special. 4 boys end up with D.A. starting their first names. So a loving husband, the father of these 4 sons. Johnny and Evie would be so proud of them all today. His work ethic was an excellent one. When I contacted Jack Martin, the former curator of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum and a former executive with DA Lubricant, he told me that Johnny's answer to a reporter about his physical regimen drew this response from John. I follow a strict regimen of actively working my Pennsylvania farm by pitching endless pitchforks of hay from the truck bed to the overhead hayloft door. This and physically moving and stacking bales of hay, combined with 12 or 14 hours of related daily chores, is my fitness training program. He loved that farm. He really did. Johnny Thompson was indeed a New England treasure. He was ours. He captivated us following World War II. We only loaned him to Boyertown, Pennsylvania, where he turned sprint car racing on its ear. And then he showed the country from coast to coast what he could do in a championship car. He left us too soon. Johnny Thompson left his mark of greatness on the American racing scene, which time can never erase. It gives me a great deal of pleasure and personal satisfaction that I have the honor to present the name of Johnny Thompson into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. And I'm very proud to say, I'd like to ask that Johnny's sons, Dana and Darrell, and Johnny's sister, Grace Scott, come forward and accept this most deserved recognition of New England's favorite son. The Flying Scot is back home again.
as Lou mentioned about getting choked up, I've been to a couple of these myself, Sprint Car Hall of Fame and a Midget Hall of Fame out in Indianapolis, and to accept. And it's an extreme honor for our family to be recognized like this in honor of our father. So thank you very much to the Hall of Fame and all the fans and kind words. Thanks.
Our next presenter has the distinction of what is probably the longest running continuous weekly column in all of New England auto racing. Championship Trail has had an honored place on page 2, 3, or 4 of Speedway Scene now for going on for about 30 years. And despite the fact that half of his column is news and half of his column is stocks, and the rest of his column, called Looking Back, gives all of us every week a chance to relive our fond memories, the names mentioned, and the races won in that particular week years before. A fellow who truly devotes his effort to a labor of love, keeping our racing past alive in print. Phil Smith.
Thank you, Mike. As most of you know, nobody does it better on TV than Mike and Dick Bergman do. And I applaud their efforts, especially when they tell the world of our brand of racing here in New England. Because if it wasn't for them, a lot of people wouldn't even know that modified racing as we know it even exists. I'd also like to thank Mr. Alfini for his gigantic effort that he puts on every year, him and Nia. Because if not for them, a lot of people would really go unnoticed. And now to the business at hand. For the last 5 decades, there's been one particular name that's been synonymous with auto racing in New England. That name is Casella. Starting back in the late 50s, Sonny Casella, or John Casella Jr., started to get interested in auto racing, and he built his first car. It was a dirt car. They ran mostly dirt until basically through the 50s and into the 60s, and had such notable drivers at the time as Fred Crockett, Roland LaPierre, and Ernie Gahan. With Ernie Gahan, they really started to travel around and made a reputation for themselves. The championships, there were numerous. Albany, Saratoga, Stafford, both dirt and asphalt, plus over, I would say, at least 200 wins. In the late 60s, Sonny decided he was going to abandon the dirt effort and go with an asphalt car. Along with some help from a very close friend of his, Dave Torini, and another gentleman by the name of Zip Zeller, they put together an asphalt coupe. They started off with Frank Farrier in it, and they ran a few shows with a limited amount of success. Later on in the year, Leo Cleary was out of a ride, and he jumped into it. This was in 1969. Leo ran very strong in that car, and in fact, it carried over into 1970, the first race at Martinsville, and then they went their separate ways. Well, it just so happened that another gentleman who happened to finish second at Martinsville that day, Freddie DeSauer, was out of a ride. He got teamed up with Sonny Casella, and they set their mind to it, and they went out and won the national championship, the NASCAR Modified Championship. Back then, it wasn't what it is today. Today, there's like 19 to 20 races, and that was it. The venue back then was Albany on Friday night, Stafford on Saturday night, Thompson on Sunday afternoon, load up and haul up to Utica, get there in time to run the concert and run Utica Sunday night, and then come home on Monday morning and go back to work. Now, during all this time, Sonny operated a successful lumber business in it's actually Coventry, Rhode Island, but they call it Summit. In 1971, what a lot of us consider the shot heard around the world was when Bugsy and Freddie DeSauer switched rides. And between Sonny Casella's 15 and Lenny Bowler's number 3, it created one of the greatest rivalries we've ever seen here in New England, both trying to outdo each other. and they both succeeded. But the one thing that they really wanted the most, and they really tried their heart to do it, was a national championship. But they had one nemesis, and that was Jerry Cook. No matter where they ran against him, they beat him, and they beat their pants off him every time they ran against him. But if it was a low-paying show, Sonny, being a man of means, wouldn't go out and run for $200 or $300 to win, where the other guy would, and that's how they beat him. In fact, just as a sidelight, I was in Casella's family room one time up there, and I happened to look up on the wall, and I finally found out how they worked out their frustrations. Sonny had a dartboard mounted on the wall of his family room, and on that dartboard was a picture of Jerry Cook. And believe it or not, they'd sit there and throw darts at it, and they'd feel a little better after that. But needless to say, they have nothing to be ashamed of. And since the Bugsy era, Kenny Bouchard drove the car, and then Mike Stefanik. But in the last 5 decades, the name continues on, because during that point in time, Sonny did probably what is probably the most thing he should be really proud of, and he provided through racing a good livelihood for his family, including himself and his wife, and his daughter and his son-in-law, through his speed shop business. And that all came because of racing. And even though the Casella 15 is no longer in competition, the wood chopper goes on, as you see it outside here. And that was one of the 1970 era coupes that both DeSaro and Bugsy drove to many, many wins. And hopefully, maybe someday, if Mike Stefanik ever does retire, which I'm sure he will sometime, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that 15 come back again. And like I say, the Casella family in racing, his wife and his daughter and his son-in-law, through his speed shop business. And that all came because of racing. And even though the Casella 15 is no longer in competition, the wood chopper goes on, as you see it outside here. And that was one of the 1970 era coupes that both DeSaro and Bugsy drove to many, many wins. And hopefully, maybe someday, if Mike Stefanik ever does retire, which I'm sure he will sometime, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that 15 come back again. And like I say, the Casella family in racing will continue on. So it's my pleasure to induct in the class of 2002, John Sonny Casella, the owner of the Woodchopper 15.
And all the members making this possible, and seeing all the people here that I haven't seen in a long time. I'm going to kind of make this thing short because Nicole, my granddaughter, says she wants to get back and make sure she sees every play. We started about 1957, built an old coupe, and we started running up in New Hampshire where Ernie Gahan, we watched him win every race. So it didn't take too long for us. If you want to win races, you go after the driver. So in July, Julie was born in the morning, we won our first race at Stafford. It was, from then on, we won a lot of races, Stafford. I think Ernie remember towing the old Grand National to Martinsville. We didn't tow it on a trailer, didn't have a trailer, we just towed it on the wheels. Wonder we made it there, and then we got back. Then we had very good success. Bill Slater, I don't know, I think Bill Slater's here somewhere. He drove for us for a short time. I don't know, is Bill here? How many races did you win straight? What you claim? Okay, I'd go for 5 or 6. But have you ever forgiven me for firing you after all them races? Okay. All right. Then we had Leo. He liked to go from the front, from the back to the front, and a lot of times he wouldn't make it. He was pretty super. And then Freddie DeSaro. He He was one of the best. He was very good. He'd go to the track, we'd have warm-ups, never show nothing. Everybody would say, oh, you're not running tonight, you're not running tonight. Well, at one time when we had the double features at Stafford and Thompson, there was 8 shows. It was two weeks. He won 7 out of the 8. That was a pretty good show. Many times as people have asked me what was our most memorable races. It's probably most of them was the ones that we lost, not the ones that we won. We won 11. It was one at Trenton with a Ford. We had a lot of fun with that Ford. We was running about at the end of the race. It was Richie Evans and Bugs. And I think Bugs will remember it. And we happened to go out there. The last probably 10 laps was going nip and tuck. And anyway, we run about a lap and a half short of fuel. So anyway, we ended up second. We had to pit and had to pull the car in and we had to pit. But the best thing, really what was nice, Richie Evans come over and says, Sonny, you boys, Bugsy, you really won that race. So that was, that really always stuck with me. I thought it was really great. Really, we've got a lot of friends here that came a long ways. Bugsy, I think he comes from Florida. There's another fellow there come from Florida. I really appreciate it, and all the rest of the people, families, and whatever. And if it wasn't for the pit crews, the people who worked on the cars, I wouldn't be here now. They stood with me. There's a whole bunch with my son-in-law, which he come on, and then racing was different. We ended up getting big trailers and whatever to go along with the rest of the people. So, and he's had a very successful seasons with us and without us. And I really got to, thank Dave Torini, which he's been with us since the night that my son was born, I think 1968, and he's been a real loyal friend. And I want to thank everybody for this whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and Sonny, congratulations. In an attempt to streamline the program to make it to kickoff, we decided tonight not to introduce folks from the crowd, but I will make an exception. You do know that Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt have each won 7 NASCAR Touring Series championships, and the fellow who is next on that list is with us tonight and also happens to be Sonny's son-in-law, the defending Featherlight Modified Series champion, Mike Stefanik. Take a bow. Our next presenter has been a contributor, prognosticator, agnosticator for Area Auto Racing News, Stock Car Racing Magazine, now Speedway Illustrated. He once held the title on the masthead of continuously insulting consultant. And if you've not heard him speak, you'll understand shortly why. He also hosted his own auto racing program, fortunately limited by the Merrimack Mountains from getting too far outside of that area, Speedline. And along with Dick Bergeron and Lou Boyd, he created the race that we know as the Spring Sizzler. Bruce Cohen.
I'd like to thank Al Feeney for having me up here, but I must be on Feeney's bad list. A few years ago, I inducted Renee Charland, and today I have the very special honor of inducting one of the bad guys of New England racing into the Hall of Fame. Big Daddy himself, he also had the name of the Flying Scotsman, Don McLaren. Don McLaren is probably New England's greatest bad guy. And you know what? He loved every minute of it. He was the original bad guy in the black hat. Born on a farm in Tewksbury, Massachusetts of May of 1935, he learned to drive around the farm in various vehicles at a very early age. In fact, McLaren won his first feature event at the wonderful Lake Norwood Arena on his 16th birthday, driving a Ford-powered Willys-bodied bomber in that division for Stan Gould of Tewksbury, Mass. Without a doubt, Don's record speaks for itself. Although many in southern New England never saw him race, it was really incredible. Here are a few of the tracks he won at. In Maine, Arundel and Beech Ridge on the dirt. In New Hampshire, Star, Hudson, Dover, Lee Raceway, Brookline, where Ronnie Bouchard started out, and Bryant Motorsports Park, which some of you may know as New Hampshire International Speedway. In Massachusetts, he won at Norwood, The Pines, West Peabody, and Westboro. In Canada, he won at Riverglade, Fredericton, and Danny Speedball, which is now called Bathurst. In Pennsylvania, he won the first super modified, and I think one of 2 races held at the Pocono. In New York, he won at Fulton and 4 features at the Oswego, New York Speedway. Ironically, his great arch rival, the great Ollie Silver, never won at Oswego. McLaren's first feature win came for driving the Flying Five for Smiling Ed Bowley, who, like Sonny Cazella, had musical drivers in his car, including Leo Cleary, the late Red Sequin, Smokey Boutwell, Norm Magrath, and many others. But it took Big Bad Don McLaren to put that car in victory lane. He also raced ice cars on Lake Winnipesaukee and raced motorcycles while in the service in Europe. He won approximately 20 NESMA races and countless races on the old Oscar Ridlin UDRC circuit. Now, many of his races were run under the Amos Bird system of handicapping. For those who are not familiar with Hudson Pines and NESMA, Amos was the handicapper there for many, many years. Now, Stafford and all these other wonderful tracks, and Thompson and NASCAR, they use their .1 and average and this and that. Amos had a much better system. If you were fast, you started down back. He didn't care who or what you were. If he thought you were fast that day, it was to the end of the pack. Don McLaren won many of his races coming from 18th to 20th, a real testimony to his ability. Some of the bigger events that he won were the 1966 NESMA Classic at Lee Raceway, where he won one of the 3 races that day, along with Eddie West, who's here with us today, and a Hall of Fame member, and Bob Cloutier. He won the 1968 NESMA Can American Classic at Star. He was the 1961, 62, and 63 Class A cut-down champion on the Ridlin UDRC circuit. In 1972, when Thompson was running at Friday nights, he won 6 features in a row and won the 1976 Icebreaker at Thompson. I think those are pretty good credentials. All famous race car drivers have some great races, and on June of 1972, on a memorable Thompson night, Ollie Silver and Don McLaren went wheel to wheel for 50 laps, side by side. They banged wheels, crossed each other over, just really hard driving. Going into the 3rd turn of the last lap, they both did a little pirouette, the 2 of them spinning into the infield. And Ed West, who was running about a half a lap behind, in 3rd place. Now, let me remind you that McLaren and Silva never touched each other. It was like a perfect ballet performance, loop-to-loop in the infield. West, who was a good half a lap behind, went on for the win, and when he goes by McLaren and Silva in the infield, he gives him the old, "Hi, fellas, I won the race." Afterwards, Don goes huffing and puffing over to Silva. Silva comes running over to McLaren. Don McLaren says to Silva, "Hey, Silva, do you feel like a blankety-blank?" "Yep." And so Silva says, "Hey, Ollie, do you feel like a blankety-blank?" "Yep." And they both went off to have a beer. On one memorable night in 1973, it was the Oswego qualifier. There was a dead right. Paul Richardson and Don McLaren battled for many laps side by side. Earl Grant was the flagman. Nesmer's Harry Harriman was the assistant flagman. And there were 2 scorers. Well, I was really heckling Earl that night, and he had me up in the flag stand for a while, and that's when I got a new respect for flagmen. But at any rate, it was bumper to bumper, wheel to wheel. They came down for the win. Earl gave the nod to Richardson. Harry Harriman thought that Don McLaren won. One scorer felt that Richardson won. The other felt that McLaren won. So we had a even battle here. So Russ Conway, who's here today, being the NESMA director and a wonderful PR person, figured, hey, I'm going to get a lot of mileage at this. He declared it a dead heat. And fortunately for Don, that year at Oswego, he had trouble in qualifying and was able to use the guaranteed spot. And it is my pleasure to introduce and induct into the Near Hall of Fame for the class of 2000 a racer's racer, a tough guy, but one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet, Big Daddy Don McLaren.
I just got one thing to say. Bill, you ought to go to the races with me if you want some booze. You know, I could sit up here all day long, stand up here all day long, and it would take that long 3 days to thank everybody that's helped me. But let me tell you, the last 50 years of racing has got to be the most wonderful thing that I have ever done. And most of all, I love building my cars, winning with them, selling them, and build some more. That was what I went after. And I just don't know what else I can say. There is one thing I would like to say before I leave. I want everybody to meet my fiance, Lorraine Campbell. You stand up and boy, has she helped me in the last 5 or 6 years with all the problems I've had. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this and all those that had part in this. Thank you.
As Don puts his plaque on the wall, a quick word about how the Hall of Fame is voted. Anyone is invited to submit a nomination of a deserving individual you think should be in the Hall of Fame. There is a selection committee. I believe there's 17 people on the committee. So this is truly by and for racers, as well as those of us who helped to kind of narrow down that selection. So all the racers, the people who stood up earlier, and the people we'll induct today will also participate in the voting in years to come. We're about to induct our first triple threat driver, a man who excelled in stock cars, in open wheel, and in road racing. And so it's appropriate that the man who is going to present him is also quite multi-talented. As a businessman, he helped develop Lime Rock Park and manage it into a successful road racing facility. As an engineer, he designed and built his own sports car, the Phoenix, which he hoped that GM would help fund as a less expensive alternative to their Corvette. As an engineer, those big round yellow barrels you see in front of every highway abutment in America, well, that's the Fitch Highway Safety Inertia Barrier. John designed that. As a driver, he won the Grand Prix of Argentina. He won the Mille Miglia, the 12 Hours of Sebring, placed third in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, his best finish in 6 attempts. Was a factory team driver for both Cunningham and Mercedes. I'm delighted to introduce a true, not just New England, not just national, but international racing legend, John Fitch.
Thank you, Mike. Very good to be with you, and I hope I'll be hearing more from you through the next season. Well, Sheila Walters is here, and always right with the world. She's a wonderful wife to Phil Walters, my dear friend. You've heard that behind every good man there's a better woman. And but I'm sure we're just talking about two quality people here. It's not one or the other, it's both. Sheila gave Phil 6 wonderful children and a great life that they shared. And this award is as much for Sheila as it is for Phil. But I asked Phil, I said, after all, 6 kids? Phil said, well, not to worry, we found out what was causing it. Phil excelled in many of the tracks that are well known to your people. Our people, I should say: Freeport Stadium, Agawam, New Haven, Kingsbridge Armory. I'm sure a lot of you have been to all of these. Cherry Park, and all the historic East Coast tracks. Phil ran over 2,000 races before he got into sports cars, and I got to know him. And over the years, Phil told me quite a bit about his oval track midget and stock car racing, and about drivers like Bill Schindler, I'm sure a lot of you knew. But many of those stories are not for polite company. He didn't have to tell me about the second phase in his racing career because I was there. I was his co-driver in endurance races and his opponent in the sprint races, the short races. And I was privileged to see him a master at work up close, and most often right in front of me. I had another opportunity to see him at work, and that's when our routine was to trade off driving during practice, especially when we were at a new circuit, to see if one of us had found a better way around a track that the other hadn't noticed. But I tell you, that's very scary business. A driver is an optimist, and a passenger is always a pessimist. Once at Thompson, where the track went off the oval into a road course, very much out of character, Phil flat out lost it. I mean, he just blew it completely in a corner and slid off, spun around, finally stopped, parked, aligned neatly on the shoulder, and Phil was a cool fellow, and coolly got out and said, "Okay, time for you to take over," and he didn't admit a thing. But we always had the best results for the team when we shared a car, and that was usually in long distance races like Le Mans and Sebring, where we needed more than one driver. And I was very proud to be known as Phil's driving partner. He had a great faculty. He was immediately quick in any kind of race car. And he told me that it was from his midget experience, where they have one lap to qualify. There's no warming up and getting used to it and so on. They have to go right out and in one lap make their best time. And that particular ability actually shocked some seasoned race crews at Le Mans the first year we went there. The Cunningham cars were quite different from usually small displacement foreign cars, European cars. And Phil went out in the drizzling night practice when everybody else was kind of pussyfooting around, feel their way. When Phil came blasting through the pits and under the Dunlop Bridge about 150 miles an hour and just electrified the whole scene. After he retired from racing, Phil took up sailing, and he was a winner there too, taking the premier Eastern event, the Block Island Regatta. The story was he was a tough skipper. He drove his crew was his family. Strict discipline, Sheila can tell you about that. But he was strict enough to win, but also fair enough to be forgiven. Phil had a very special incentive to survive his war injuries and his 2 careers in racing. He made sure he survived because he had Sheila to come home to. And I'm honored to be a part of this tribute to both of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alfini and the New England Hall of Fame, for inviting me here today and for honoring my husband, Ted Tappert, Phil Walters. The first year he raced at Agawam was the year we were married in '49, and I remember many, many happy events that took place. My son Philip and his wife Diane are with me today, but I'm so pleased that you all remembered him. Thank you.
With all the mechanics and fabricators we've got here, you'd think. Obviously, I am not one of them. There we go. Where's Mark Martin and that Bob Dole guy, anyway? Take it over. Thank you, John, and our congratulations to the Walters family. John, by the way, at a time when most of his contemporaries are sunning themselves in Florida, is right now very involved into soft wall research and development for auto racing. Our next presenter has long been known as one of the men to beat in the state of Vermont and wherever he took his dragon wagon. He started his career at Catamount Stadium and then competed at nearby Thunder Road. Is a veteran and winner on the old NASCAR North Series, the Busch North Series. He's been a Vermont state champion and many times a Catamount Speedway champion. Would you please welcome Bobby Dragon.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that introduction. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations to all of the inductees past and this year's induction group. It's made up of guys that I've been looking up to and remembering from my early days starting out at Catamount, you know, Bugsy and the Casella car and Freddie DeCero and all the Canadians, Cabana and Manny, and from across the lake, Charlie Trombley and Bill, you know, Dick Nephew, Bill Wimble, those guys, you know, they were just great and they were my heroes. But we're here to kind of get another guy into this thing. I think Dick, as it turns out, is probably the first of our group, which kind of in a little bit later history than some of the earlier guys. We're kind of mid-60s on to this point, and as far as I'm concerned, Dick probably retired maybe a little bit earlier than we all wanted to see. He certainly probably could be doing it still without a problem, but we understand. So we'll get started. When I got the call last Sunday to be Dick's presenter for induction, I wasn't sure if I was the right person to do it, but firstly, I'm not really that comfortable getting up in front of groups like this, and secondly, you know, he said 5 minutes worth of talking, and that'll come hard too, but I think Dick and I can probably help everybody that wants to get home to the Super Bowl today by cutting it short. So, you know, there's so much to be said about him. I'm sure I'm only going to cover just a little bit of what he did in his career, and I'll try and hit on some of the things I remember. But Dick and I spent the better part of 20 years of our summer months racing against each other somewhere. Seemed like every paved track that existed in New England, New York, Pennsylvania, down to Dover, Delaware, and north of the border from, excuse me, from Toronto to Montreal to the Maritimes of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. We raced each other at one time or another. He and I didn't always see things the same way. And he was Irish and I was a French Polack, and I don't know who could be more stubborn, him or me, but through it all, we remained good friends. He was very opinionated and famous for his down east wit and one-liners. And we had a lot of laughs and a lot of fun those years on the road, and it's something I'll never forget. 95 really marked the last active season of racing for Dick. Nowadays, he can be found traveling up and down the main turnpike behind the wheel of one of his trucks, probably with a cigar going. But the cargo has changed from fish to Dick's hauling logs now. And he said they smell a lot better and they don't spoil nearly as quick. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Irish Angel, Dick McCabe.
I want to thank you people for coming in. I want to especially thank Bobby. He owes me that because he's probably the one that made me sweat the most when I was racing. He talks about aggressive. When you had him behind you, you had your hands full and then some. But I'm not going to bore you with all the gory details. I just want to thank everybody, and especially all these people that were inducted into this. Like everybody says, the crew is a big part of it. My sister and brother-in-law and my daughters, my wife and my nephew and a friend of mine, Ray Jansen, and a lot of these people who had crew members that been with them through the whole season, their lifetime career, some of them stayed. They have a lot to do with the success of these teams, and it's kind of too bad that they should get more recognition too. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
So this mild-mannered young fellow, he punches a keyboard by day, and by night he works on his books. Now who does he write about? Bill Simpson, Tony Stewart, and his next book, Bugsy Stevens. This guy is a major party animal by night. Look at who he hangs out with. Would you believe it? Quite a ways from Plainville, Bones Bersiger. Come on up, please.
Nick Finoro has played many roles in automobile racing, and he has played them all with gusto and with charm, and above all, with a level of integrity worthy of the institution he enters today. Everything Finoro has done in this sport, he has done well. Everything he has done like a Hall of Famer. He has been a Hall of Fame race driver. It could be argued that never in the history of midget racing was there an age more golden than the period immediately following World War II, or a midget organization tougher than the post-war version of the American Racing Drivers Club, or ARDC. Its list of champions between 1945 and 1960 reads like an open-wheel who's who. Bill Schindler, Georgie Rice, Mike Nazarek, Jigs Peters, Len Duncan, Dud Schaefer, and this man we honor today, Nick Finoro, who stormed to the ARDC title in 1950 aboard an Offie midget owned by Eddie Allen. Nick Finoro didn't just race with the midget gods, he beat them on a regular basis. He came out of Whippany, New Jersey, and before long he was a major star up and down the East Coast. Hinchcliffe Stadium in his home state, Philadelphia's Yellow Jacket Speedway, Century Stadium in West Springfield, Seekonk Speedway, Wall Stadium on the Jersey Shore, the Danbury Race Arena. Nick had a special bond with Danbury. He moved there in 1948 after marrying a local girl named Elizabeth Lee Kuiper. How good was Finoro in the Golden Age? Well, the dean of midget owners back then was a legendary character named Pappy Huff. Pappy's philosophy was simple. You identified the best driver and you hired him. And Pappy Huff hired Nick Finoro. In other words, Finoro was as good as it got. He has been a Hall of Fame official. One day in 1956, Nick Finoro hung up his helmet for good. The very next day, he stepped into a starter stand at Middletown, New York, and he stood in one flag stand or another for the next quarter century. At the time of his retirement in 1992, he had waved the flags for the CART IndyCar Series for 14 consecutive seasons, which tells you how highly regarded he had become. Photos from the early days as a flagger show Nick to be a dapper dresser, as was the style of the day. But he was never a showboat, never one of those officials who gets caught up in the authority of his position. To him, the job wasn't about being in charge. It was a way to continue being an active part of the racing fraternity. He told me once, I'd get up on that flag stand and I'd say a prayer. I'd ask the Lord to protect my friends, the drivers. Some officials insist upon acting like the show is all about them. Nick Finoro had more style than that. He has been a Hall of Fame friend. In the early 1960s, when no driver got to the top without spending some time being broke and hungry, a rising young midget driver used to literally follow Nick Finoro to the track. See, this struggling newcomer was never sure if his streetcar was mechanically sound enough to make it, and he wanted to have a buddy close by in case he broke down. That kid's name was Mario Andretti. There was another young driver who had already made it to the top, who had won the Indianapolis 500, and who was looking to get away from the autograph seekers one hot afternoon at Langhorne, Pennsylvania. He found refuge in the infield grass, sitting in the shade beside Nick Finoro's 1953 Cadillac, and he helped himself to a picnic lunch which Elizabeth had prepared. That kid's name was A.J. Foyt. Andretti and Foyt were obviously as good at choosing their friends as they were at choosing the fastest way around a racetrack. And Nick, well, he was just always glad to help out a couple of buddies. He has been a Hall of Fame family man. This sport's history is dotted by stories of men who sacrificed their family lives to pursue glory on the racetrack. Nick Finoro went the other way. His reputation earned him a shot at the Indianapolis 500. The offer came from one of the most respected car owners of the day. But the mid-50s were a bloody chapter in the American racing saga. Two of the greatest of all time, Bill Vukovich and Bob Swiker, both of them Indy winners, were among several men who had recently lost their lives. Nick's wife admitted that it wouldn't bother her if he passed up the 500 or even if he retired altogether, which he did. It was a matter of priorities. He said, "I had always said that if I was lucky enough to have a successful marriage and a family, I would never give that up for racing, so I quit." He didn't stop going to Victory Lane, though. His sons, Drew and Noki, are two of the best midget racers this nation has ever produced, and two of the most exciting drivers you will ever see in any type of race car. Between them, they have won close to 200 feature events. Just as importantly, they have won tens of thousands of fans. But make no mistake, fan number one was the man they called Dad. In May of '94, on the night before the Indianapolis 500, I bumped into Nick Fenor at a midget race at Seekonk. He said, "Everybody wants to know why I'm not at the 500. Well, it's because my sons are here. I want to watch my boys race." One more time, Fenor had his priorities in order. He has been a Hall of Fame ambassador of goodwill. Nick is a man who is proud of his sons, and he has every right to be. But I've been at races where Drew or Noki won thanks to somebody else's misfortune, which after all is a part of racing. And while his son was posing for pictures in Victory Lane, you could find Papa Nick lending a word of encouragement to the poor driver who had been less fortunate. He would be thrilled for his victorious son, of course, but Nick Fenor was enough of a sportsman to appreciate the effort the other guy had put in. He has been a Hall of Famer, period. So please understand that while we gather here today for the induction of a great open-wheel race driver, we also salute a man who is much more than that. We celebrate the life and times of one of racing's good guys. We applaud a gentleman who truly is a gentleman. And we usher into this New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame a fellow who makes this institution better by his very presence, who adds a bit more class to this class. Please join me in a warm welcome for one of my favorite people, Mr. Nick Fenor.
First, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something. I'm a little nervous, I'm very emotional, but I'm very truthful. I want to thank, I have to read this because the memory isn't too good anymore. But what I would like to say is I want to thank Master of Ceremonies Mike Joy, Al Finney, President of the NEAR, and Bones, as I said, for the introduction. Members and selection committee of members of NEAR, my racing friends, including all of you here this evening, my co-inductees today, and my racing family. This has to be one of the best days of my life. I'm here. With my friends, everyone is having a great time. It doesn't get much better than this. Thank you very much for selecting me to the NEAR Hall of Fame. This is a tremendous honor, and to be in the same class with my long friend and competitor, Johnny Thompson, makes it be so much meaningful. As Bones pointed out when he introduced me, I've been very fortunate to have the career in auto racing that I had. From the first time I stepped into a midget to running throughout New England and the eastern United States, being the ARDC champion in 1950, being the first NASCAR midget champion in 1953, to being the starter for ARDC, ATQMRA, USAC, and the chief starter for CART for 14 years and waving those flags from coast to coast and overseas, as well as being invited by Tony George to be the honorary starter for the Indianapolis 500 in 1996. 500, I never dreamed that I would someday receive such an honor as this. This NEAR award is very special to me because it brings back to my roots. Midget racing in New England, that's what this honor tonight is all about. Yes, I ran sprints and I ran a few stock cars as well, and I won my share of races at many different tracks in this country. But I will never forget those right here in New England Lonsdale Sports Arena, with its high bank, Seekonk Speedway, Westboro Stadium, Danbury, Bridgeport, Connecticut, Thompson, Plainfield. Those were the finest days of my life. Whether I was running Bay State or UCO, competing against Johnny Thompson, Charlie Ethier, Frank Simonetti, Steve McGrath, Bill Randall, Joseph Stilio, they were among the finest midget drivers in the country. All New Englanders, all top-notch drivers, each of them running flat out, wearing that checker. The greatest thing that ever happened to me in my racing career, to happen at the track in West Haven, Connecticut. Not too far from here, it was there that I first met Betty, who was to become my wife. Here you should talk about a couple of races or events that took place in New England. And you might want to add something about Johnny Thompson too. If you want to tell me, I'll try to write it up. I'd just like to go back to one thing. The most wonderful thing that ever happened to me in my career in racing, if it wasn't for racing, I would have never met my wife. She shares in both the good and the bad. She wins and drops out. And it was for her and our family that I made the decision to put this helmet away in 1956. Thank you, Betty. And that family, what a family. 2 wonderful sons who both follow my footsteps and both have done much better than I did. I am very proud of Noki and Drew for what they have accomplished in racing and for the wonderful family they have. Would all my family stand, please? Would my family stand, everybody? Yeah. And I mustn't forget my wonderful daughter, Cindy. She's not with us today. She's back home with her mother. But she, too, was involved in racing for many years as a scorer. And all this started when I went to the midget driving school in Staten Island in 1947. I never could have imagined this happening tonight. In closing, I want to again thank the members of NEAR for this tremendous honor. You have no idea how much you made me so very proud and so very humble and ashamed. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. God bless you. But I just want to say something about Johnny Thompson. I knew Johnny very, very well. Raced with him many, many times. Johnny Thompson wasn't just a great race driver, but he was a great person. A great person. Johnny, whether he won or whether he lost, he reminded me of Rick Mears. He still had that smile on his face. You could see it in his eyes. He didn't say much, but he sure could say it on the racetrack. I'll always remember this night. And I'll always remember Johnny Thompson. I would like to have his 3 sons come up here, please. His 4 sons. The Thompson boys. I just want to present to the boys a picture of Johnny Thompson and myself. These are the pictures of Johnny Thompson and myself taken at one of the racetracks. And I just want to see their sons get these photos because he was one of my greatest friends. He'll always be with us. He may not be here, but he's in heaven. And he'll always be with us. Thank you.
Well, we had to work hard to grow the sport because especially in southern New England, news of racing was scarce. Even though in 1970, 25,000 people could be found at a racetrack somewhere within 100 miles radius of Hartford on every Saturday night, the daily papers would still rather cover stick and ball sports and those hapless Hartford Whalers and things like that. It was tough for auto racing to get a place in the papers. And so if you wanted that kind of news, you had to turn to 1 or 2 fellows, either John Kershaw in the Current or our next presenter in the Times and later the New Haven Register. And since leaving the newspaper business, he's become the Tub Thumper, for open wheel racing, for Waterford Speed Bowl, and for many other good causes, including the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. Our next presenter, please, Pete Zanardi.
See how impressive I am. The guy that I'm going to present this to just left the room. So somebody go get Miller. Get this one point out of the way here. Ray Miller won his first feature in the late 90s at Stafford Speedway. I believe he beat Bill Slater. In 1981, he won the Thompson 300. He passed Jeff Bodine with 22 laps to go. 1985, he was a winner at Waterford. Jamie Tomato was second, and a guy named Bugsy Stevens was third. Bugsy won the pole that night, but couldn't keep it, I guess. He won 3 straight Ferraro 100s, 80, 81, 82, and I guess everybody knows the kind of field that was at Stafford in the early 80s. Bonesy calls it part of the golden age of modified racing. And I think there's probably good evidence to that. But this here is all about history. That's what this whole event is. That's why it was started. That's what we talk about here. And if you want some history, I invite you people to go up to Ray Miller's garage in East Granby. That place literally drips with history. You're like swimming in history. Ray Miller's father was part of the Littell Miller Offie. And I'm Nick, I'm sure you can tell us about the Littell Miller Offie. Now, Jay Miller is driving race cars, Ray's son. And I'm sure when he gets up here, if they ever find him, I'm sure when he gets up here, oh, there he is. I'm sure when he gets up here, he's going to tell you how proud he is of 3 generations of racing coming out of that one garage. And 3 generations, 7 decades maybe, and poor Ray has had to face me chasing him down to do stories, and probably 4 of them. And it's always been a great joy to talk to Ray Miller, because you always understood what this sport was about. You always understood the importance of its history, the beauty of this sport. And while Ray was obviously a talented race driver, I think that's what I love most about this guy. He absolutely is as thankful that he raced as he is justifiably proud. As thankful that he raced in a golden era that included guys like the Bug and like Jeff Bodine and like Bill Slater. Ray Miller can express things a whole lot better than I. The guy actually went to college, by the way. And I hope I don't offend him when I tell you this is a blue-collar, hard-nosed, dirty-hands racer. It is a great privilege and a great joy to bring Ray Miller up here to be part of the the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. Get up here, Ray.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all. Thank you for the hall. This is a great day for Miller Racing, Ray Miller, Pat Miller, Jay Miller. It's a great day for all of us. I'd like to tell you where it all started. It started in the back of a 1946 Buick, traveling with my dad, his partner, my mom, traveling with the Littell Miller Offie as a 6-year-old boy, traveling to the local tracks throughout New England. Back then, it wasn't like Sonny Casella did 4 nights in 7 days. They did 8 races in 7 days. West Haven, Bridgeport, Lonsdale, Rhinebeck, Manans, Freeport, Westboro, Thompson, Cherry Park in Avon, Connecticut. Wonderful tracks. Very proud that my dad's car in 1950, with the driver, the late Charlie Ethier, aboard, finished second to Nick Fenora, driving the Eddie Allen number 18. They were second. Very proud of that tradition. And today, with the inductees, with Nick Fenora, Ted Tappett, and our third midget driver, Johnny Thompson. His car competed with drivers such as the Rice brothers, Georgie Rice, Johnny Rice, Charlie Ethier, Burt Brooks, all great midget races. My dad sold his car in 1951 after Charlie Ethier was killed out in Salem, Indiana, which ended his career, and my dad lost interest. They sold midgets. I was only 8 years old at that time, but racing certainly was in my blood already. From there, I became a real fan of racing through high school, traveling to Riverside Park. Riverside Park back in the 50s and 60s was the heyday for stock car racing. So many champions, so many Hall of Famers went through Riverside Park. I was just so thrilled to watch and knew I wanted to be a driver. I was really kind of unsure of how that was going to happen, but I wanted to be a driver. It was delayed when I went off to college and was successful and finished my college career and obtaining a degree. But you know, one thing, I was in business. I took business administration in college, but when I got out of college and started building my own car, I bought a lot of parts from Rennie Charland, and let me tell you, that college degree didn't help me one bit when I dealt with Rennie Charland. I'll tell you that. But I wasn't an instant success by a long stretch of the imagination. Starting in 1965 at Plainville Stadium, never won my first feature until 1969 at Stafford. Back then we had the fuel injection, the great days of modified, but that was our first win in 1969. Went on and pretty successful in the late 70s and 80s. I know I was the same driver, but at one point we put in a Hutter motor and everybody wondered, gee, Ray got a lot better. Well, anybody that's driven a Hutter motor knows what a Hutter motor could do for a man's career. I want to have a special thanks for a guy that, believe it or not, we were in the Cub Scouts together, and if you can believe this one, we took tap dance lessons together. We went through high school together, we played sports. He helped me on my first car. He's with Jay Miller and his team today. He does all the sheet metal. He's the gentleman that restored the number 7 coupe that's out on display. Mr. Pete Burhans and his lovely wife Judy. They've just been great, and all that they do is so appreciated. Thanks for everyone for coming, and go Patriots!
Final induction for the class of 2002, which you might have read in the papers that I was going to do, and I had to beg off from Al Feeney. And it's one thing to talk about your heroes and to make them famous, and it's another thing to talk about your mentor and your own personal hero. And I said I couldn't do it. I just owe the man too much. So I called on one of my longtime best friends, who was also in this gentleman's debt. You know him as the editor of Speedway Illustrated, a great magazine that has his name above the title, as it well should, as the best reporter on pit road, and my longtime broadcast colleague, Dick Bergman.
If you ask him about his career, Ken Squire would say that he's just an old storyteller. But in fact, he's the most important man in the history of auto racing on television. For nearly 50 years, Ken Squire has held the microphone and sold this sport to the benefit of everyone in this room. For over 40 years, he's been a racetrack operator. His career began at age 15 when he stood atop a flatbed truck at Morrisville, Vermont, and called a day's stock car race. Ken's still calling stock car races at his Thunder Road Speedway, doing exactly what he did on CBS television for more than 25 years, and at Turner Broadcasting for more than 15. What he's done is to tell the stories of the men and women behind the wheel, stories of common people doing very uncommon things. Ken Squire has created his own platforms from which to speak. He's cut the deals to put auto racing on television, and then he's gone on the air himself to tell stories about racing people, with all the color, all the drama, and all the emotion that we all know is there. Now, the Ken Squire that most folks know is the guy who brought the in-car camera to television and the guy who called that incredible 1979 Daytona 500. Now, most of America was snowed in on that day for the first ever live flag-to-flag network broadcast of a stock car race. And when the ratings were in, it was astounding. That race pulled a better rating than the Olympics. It was almost an impossible thing to have happen. Richard Petty won, and then there was a fight on the backstretch as the emotions boiled over. Allison Yarborough, Ken explained, knew they had lost. But Squire didn't just call the race that day. He persuaded CBS to run it live flag to flag. Without his effort, that 1979 Daytona 500 may well have never made air. Without his brilliant call of the event, it just wouldn't have been as good to watch and listen to. As important as that 1979 race was, it's the collective calls of thousands of races that are the real legacy of Ken Squire. He is the greatest storyteller auto racing on television has ever seen. Long before anybody else understood it, Squire realized that racing is really entertainment. An engaging conversationalist, he brought the sports heroes home with stories of these people who, when he talked about them, came out larger even than they were in life, and they were pretty damn big in life. Ask anyone, and they'll tell you that when Ken Squire was CBS anchor, as the voice of the Daytona 500, that was by far the best auto racing broadcast of the year. I was fortunate enough to work a couple of those races that Ken anchored, and I also attended the meetings. Lots and lots and lots of meetings. And what I remember most from them, in fact, it's the only thing I remember from them, is when Ken Squire spoke, everybody else in the place shut up. They all listened to him, if not to each other. Director Bob Fishman once told me that for decades, CBS relied more on Squire than anybody else in making judgments about what the Daytona 500 broadcast should look and sound like. Ken Squire's Motor Week Illustrated was the first auto racing news broadcast to appear on television. The show was later copied and imitated by ESPN, which called their version Speed Week. Then came TNN's Race Day and so many others. If you remember those Motor Week shows, you may wonder why so many of today's racing news broadcasts just aren't as good. And I can tell you why. They don't have Ken Squire and his partner, Fred Reinstein, behind them. There have been so many successes, so many contributions. The Winners Show, the Darrell Waltrip Show, and other original programming for which Squire was responsible. Along with Jim Foster and Roger Bear, Ken Squire founded Motor Racing Network, which today boasts hundreds of radio stations that carry racing's broadcasts. So much of this stuff, Motor Racing Network, Motor Week, the storytelling, has created the foundation from which the enormous popularity of American stock car racing has grown. Ken also operates 5 radio stations in what he likes to call Radio Free Vermont. A favorite Saturday morning show, music to go to the dump by. It's entertainment all the way, just the way he's done it on television and just the way he's done it at his racetrack. He lives in Vermont with his wife Elizabeth, a herd of sheep, and a collection of border collies that keep the sheep moving. A long list of racers have benefited from his counsel. An equally long list of folks with offices in Daytona Beach, Florida, have benefited from his advice. Mike Joy and I are enormously grateful for the breaks he provided that got us into big-time television. But we, Ken Squire, are more grateful for the role model you provided. For so many of today's television racing announcers, the guy each broadcaster seeks to imitate, copy, and steal from is Ken Squire. In the business of auto racing on television, Ken Squire is the man. So as we gather today to honor the 2002 class of near inductees, it is so appropriate for Ken Squire to join the elite group of those who have accomplished so much. He deserves to be in this hall in 3 ways: as a promoter, as an announcer, and as a man behind the scenes of so many brilliant television decisions. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for all you have done for this sport and all of this in this room, and congratulations.
Jesus, Don, I'm glad that was the short version. Oh, my heart. I'm humbled, truly, because I really don't deserve to be here. The previous candidates that were here definitely deserve to be here, and some of the folks that gave the nominating addresses deserve to be here because they are the ones who have made the difference and have really brought us all together. I'm just, as Bergman says, just a storyteller. But I'm pleased and proud to have that pedestal and share with you for a moment my feeling about what you people have done here today to honor those drivers that you have so respectfully treated in the manner they deserve. They deserve it, and you deserve it. I've often felt, and one of my basic premises, if I ever get the book done, is that there's a false sense in America about what particularly stock car racing was all about. I was so glad that John Fitch was here today because there's another piece of this I want to get back to. But as far as stock car racing is concerned, we hear over and over again how it was born in the South among some whiskey runners. And all of us that sit here today and have loved this sport from the time we were kids know that's horseplucky. That indeed, in the state of Vermont from whence I came, when all that energy came back from World War II, when the Rennie Charlans came home from the hard work of World War II in the Pacific and the Atlantic, that's when a golden period of motorsports happened in this country. In the state of Vermont, tiny little state, at that time less than 500,000 people, there were 20 racetracks, weekly tracks, 22 in counting the 2 fairgrounds. In 1945, the first AAA national championship race in the United States was run in Essex Junction, Vermont. I don't know, I was 7 or 8, and my hero, Ted Horn, beat Lee Walter by about 5 feet. All throughout this part of the world, you know the story of the McCabe's up in Maine. You know the stories of the Cheshire Fairgrounds in Keene, New Hampshire when it ran the sprint car races in the 30s. You sure know the stories of when the midgets packed Boston Garden back in the 30s. We have a great history and a great tradition. But the sense that what became American stock car racing happened in one part of the country just isn't true. And the fact that you folks take a Sunday afternoon when there's this big football game and you come together to honor the people that you have today and the ones you've honored in the past like Bugsy tells me that there's something so special in what you're doing, and I hope you don't forget it. I hope you realize what an important thing it is that you're doing, that there's a texture here, that you're welding things together, you're making memories for yourselves and for others. If there's one thing racing has lacked, it's been that sense, that business of having a story to tell. I've always thought that was the best part of it. Stock car racing was always the sport of the folks. The late Gene Shepard said thoroughbred racing was the sport of kings and American stock car racing was the sport of friends. And that's what you are here today. And you are sharing this time with true American heroes. And the beauty of racing, of all these people you have seen talking about Johnny Thompson and those drivers of the past, is it's all knitted together by you. These are our heroes. They were local heroes. And you can go from the Northeast to the Northwest and you will find people that believe in this sport just as much as you do, love it just as much, and have their heroes too. The Southeast got a little bit of a break
They didn't have the Red Sox. They didn't have anything except Georgia Tech and the Crimson Tide. And so therefore some folks in the Carolinas formed the Carolina Press Bureau, run by a fellow named Jim Foster, and the brilliance of Bill France, and they had their own sport, and it was our sport. But had it been turned around, and you heard what Mike was talking about, when you couldn't get an inch in the Hartford Courant, and if you wanted anything in a Boston paper, forget about it. My, how those times have changed, because we were in the world of the established press. We had the Ivy League, and we had the Red Sox, and we had baseball down to Washington and out to St. Louis and up to Chicago, and that was proper organized sports. And thank God there were some good, clean drunks like the Pulitzer Prize winner Henry McLemore and some of his wild and crazy buddies that hung out with France, and they got out there and found out there was something else, and this was part of it. And I guess the best reward, along with what you folks from NEAR have done for me today, is to see happen what Bill France told me when he hired me in 1964 or 5, back in there somewhere. I was just another snowbird that went down there to do something. And he said, you know, Mr. Salesman was France Sr. He said, you know, you're getting into something here. By the year 2000, this will be one of the biggest sports in the United States of America. Sure. Bill was wrong by about 6 months. And everyone in this room probably believed in '65 just as much as he did, that that day would come. Finally, again, wanting to thank NEAR and thank all of you for sitting so patiently and listening so carefully. And I don't want to belabor this, because I think probably the kidney award goes to at least 12 of you out here today that look like you're just about doubled up. So, but I hope you'll take that home with you today, that this is a sport we can be bloody proud of because of the kind of people that you have met today. No one tougher than McCabe, except maybe Dragon, or Charland, or Bugsy, or any of the names that you have heard here today. So I'm just really shocked that you would include me in this group, and I truly don't believe I deserve to be here. I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you for a moment or two about something that all of us here in New England love and care so much about, and only hope that we will come out of this room and look to greater groups in the future who will know and understand that the American way, the true American way of going forward, is what this sport has been about from the very beginning, and it is the toughest sport. Thank you so, so much for this opportunity and this recognition today.
Take some of those stories you've heard today and some of the ones that are dear to your heart and share them with the folks that don't remember all of Bugsy Stevens' rubber snakes and don't remember all of Rennie Charland's stunts and these great battles and great races you've heard about today. Because those stories are worth sharing, and that's our history in this Hall of Fame, that moving exhibit. That's the way it's going to be passed on. Enjoy the Super Bowl. We'll all see you here on hopefully a different date next year. Al Feeney and your committee, Kim, and everyone that has been a part of this Hall of Fame, thank you for your efforts. And as always, have a safe ride home. Thank you. Music to go to the dump by is heard every Saturday morning on WDEV, Radio Free Vermont.
We believe, pay attention, this is important.